Namaste, dear friends. Namaste to all of you. Welcome to our Namaste, dear friends. Viniyoga. Welcome to our Viniyoga. Viniyoga Unplugged for the month of May. Namaste to all of you. Greetings. Let's begin with our invocation chant and then we will proceed. Oh. Shoklambaradharam Vishnum Shashivarnan Chaturbhujam Prasannavadanam Dhyayet Sarvavighnopashantaye Yasya Dviradavaktradyah Parishadya Parashatam Vignane Gnante Satatam Vishwaksenantamashraye Jnananandamayan Devam Nirmalaspatikakritim Adharam Sarvavidyanam Hayagrevam Pundarikasanasenam Pandurabhrendusannibham Akhandabodhajanakam Hayagrevam Gurubhyastadgurubhyascha Namo Vakamadhimahe Vranimahe Chatatradyo Dampati Jagatam Pati Shri Naganiyam Mahapuryam Tamraparnyuttare Tate Shri Tintrini Mooladhamne Shathakopaya Mangalam Neelatungastanagiri Tate Suptamudbodhya Krishnam Parartham Swam Shruti Shatashirasiddhamadhyapayanti Svocheshtayam Srajani Galitanya Balatkritya Bhungte Godatasya Nama Edamidam Bhoya Evastu Bhoyaha Jayatu Jayatu Natho Nyaya Tattva Praneta Jayatu Jayatu Yogi Yoga Gokya Pravakta Jayatu Jayatu Sakshat Tattvadarshi Maharshi Jayatu Jayatu Bhaktir Mulakandam Munindraha Swadhayanya Sarvesham Trayantartham Sudurgraham Stotrayamasa Yogindra Tam Vande Yamunakvayam Yo Nityamachyutapadambuja Yugmarukmam Vyamohitastaditarani Trinaya Mene Asmadgurur Bhagavatasya Dayayika Sindho Ramanujasya Charanau Sharanam Prapadye Shriman Venkatanatharya Kavitar तार्किककेसरी वेदान्ताचार्यवर्यो मे सन्निधत्तां सदा हृदि। श्रीकृष्ण ब्रह्मतन्त्रोत्तम गुरु करुणावाप्तचक्राङ्क भाष्यम् वैराग्याचारवार्धौ वरदपदमुखे लक्ष्मणे न्यस्तभारम् श्रीवागीशात्ततुर्यं शठरिपो यतिराट् वेदचूडार्यमूर्तिम् नोत्नं श्रीरङ्गनाथं कलिरिपुमनघं ब्रह्मतन्त्रं श्रयामः। श्रीमन्नूतनरङ्गनाथयतिराट् आप्तात्मविद्यालयम् श्रीमन्नूतनलक्ष्मणार्ययतिराट् सम्प्राप्ततुर्याश्रमम् श्रीवासेन्द्रकटाक्षसन्ततसुधा लक्ष्यात्मयोगाश्चितम् श्रीमन्नूतनवागधीशयमिनं भक्त्याश्रयामो गुरुम् श्रीकृष्णवागीशयतीश्वराभ्यां सम्प्राप्तचक्राङ्कणभाष्यसारम् श्रीनूत्नरङ्गेन्द्रयतौ समर्पितस्वम् श्रीकृष्णमार्यं गुरुवर्यमीडे विरोधे कार्तिके मासे शतताराकृतोदयम् योगाचार्यं कृष्णमार्यं गुरुवर्यमहं भजे। शेष्यकं कृष्णमार्यस्य नाथवंशप्रदीपकम् कल्याणगुणरूपन्तं श्रीदेशिकन्नमाम्यहम् प्रशान्तपुरुषाकारं विनियोगप्रचारकं विशेषवैदिकं सूरिं तन्देशिकं स्मराम्यहम्। लक्ष्मीनाथसमारम्भां नाथयामुनमध्यमाम् अस्मद् आचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ॐ। शान्त शान्त शान्तेः। So, namaste, friends. Namaste from India. So, this is why there is a slight change of time for this time's session because of the time difference here. Welcome back to our monthly meetings, and it's a bit late in May because I've been traveling since about a week and a half ago. Today we will talk about one of the wonderful attitudes that Patanjali is asking us to remember, that is called AHIMSA. And I think it's a very important attitude not only in the time of Patanjali, but also in today's times. Patanjali presents this as the first of the Ashtanga Yoga. Among the Ashtanga Yoga, the first is what is called as the Yama, and among the Yama, the first is the Ahimsa. So Ahimsa gets a very high place in Patanjali's heart, in his teachings, and there are references in our Vedic tradition that also say Ahimsa paramo dharmaha, that Ahimsa is the highest dharma. The practice of Ahimsa is the highest dharma. Ahimsa is presented as the opposite of Himsa. It's a very fascinating way in which this word is used, A plus Himsa. Himsa represents a violent action, an action with the intention of hurting somebody. It is with intent to hurt somebody. If you are hurting somebody inadvertently, that is not actually ahimsa. Like, for example, if by mistake you are dropping a cup of coffee on the floor and that coffee burns somebody else nearby, it was not your intention to hurt them, but they anyway get hurt. But if it was your intention to hurt them, then it is definitely a himsa attitude. Also important is that the action itself should not be considered as himsa or ahimsa. The intent is what matters. For example, if you are using a knife to cut somebody, you can't say that this itself is a violent action, because if it is a doctor using it for surgery to help you come out of some misery, that is not considered as himsa, because the intent is not to hurt you. The intent is the opposite, which is to help you heal. So it's very important to remember that ahimsa or himsa is defined based on the intention behind an action or a word, and it this has to be expressed. The non-violent behavior from us, the ahimsa, has to be expressed in what we call the three faculties of action. One is, of course, our intentions. One is the words that we are using. And the third one is the actions through which we are engaging such an action. So we have to practice ahimsa at the level of our intentions, at the level of our words, as well as at the level of our actions, for it to be considered as ahimsa. And this is very, very important in many, many dimensions, the concept of non-violence. And this is very relevant, especially today, because we are living in a very violent times, and everybody thinks that, well, if he started the fight and he started the fight, etc. Actually, the concept of ahimsa is to remain unprovoked even though there is provocation. So you cannot justify any way to justify your violence. There is only two people who are able to do that. One is, of course, God, we believe, and the other one is a judge who is given that authority to sentence somebody to prison or death or punishment, etc. It's only that person's job, not one of us, you or me, who decides that. So it's very, very important that even acts of revenge are inconsistent with ahimsa. Just because somebody is punching me, if I punch them back, there are two acts of himsa, not only one. there is two acts of himsa, not just one, which is even worse because then the karma of himsa is doubled. Already it is a problem if there is one set of karma. Now we respond also with violence, then there is two sets of karma that we have to contend with, and that cycle will only multiply. And this is very, very important to remember. And again, Patanjali is very clear that the acts of ahimsa is considered, we have to do himsa, the acts of himsa, violence, is considered violence whether you do it yourself or you get it done by somebody else, or you are condoning an act of violence that you either wanted to do or you are thinking of getting somebody to do, but somehow it's happening and you are just condoning it. Krita karita anumoditaha lobha krodha moha purvakaha. And again, whether it is a mild act of ahimsa or an intense act of himsa, it doesn't matter, it's still considered himsa. You can't say, oh, I will only kill one person, not 100 people. It doesn't matter how many you kill. It is all wrong. One life is too many to be taken. The same way, one punch is one more than necessary. One abusive word is one more word more than necessary. So it doesn't matter whether it's a big issue, big act of violence or small act of violence, it is still considered the same. Mridu madhya adhimatra, whether it is little or big, it does not matter. So we need to practice ahimsa. And of course, it's more practical sense to talk about what can we do for ahimsa rather than say, well, don't do this and don't do that. How do we practice ahimsa? So there are some ways through which we can practice ahimsa. Some of them perhaps are, let's say, personal, and some are interpersonal, and some may be something that is beyond transpersonal, for example. So it is possible that there are many ways in which we can integrate ahimsa in our life. I think it's much more helpful for all of us to start practicing ahimsa in some ways rather than trying to say avoid this or avoid that, because that is a bit ambiguous sometimes. And so that's why I'm thinking about giving you some ideas of how we can practice ahimsa. So the first method that I would give, which is, I think, very easy for us because this involves only us, and this is something that we are engaged in at least 2 or 3 times a day, if not more. So if we can start doing this, we already are beginning the practice of ahimsa. And this is to eat a vegetarian diet or to reduce significantly the amount of animals we are consuming. And this is especially so in modern time because if you look at the way the animals are processed in the modern era, in the factories, and in the way they are treated, I think you will realize that what you are consuming is not the meat, but it's the violence that is being done to those animals. And if you have any doubts about it, you can actually watch a very interesting documentary that has come out from an Italian journalist, which my dear friend Arone and Cleo showed me, is called Food for Profit. Watch that, and then you will understand what I'm saying. But you don't need to watch that because this is very public information. So, in a certain way, if you start by healthy food, eating healthy vegetarian food, reducing the amount of meat that you're eating, that is a way of actually starting ahimsa in your daily life. Second thing about eating, if you eat appropriately, appropriate quantity. See, if you eat more than you should eat, you are creating himsa to the body, because your body has to work hard to digest the food that it has to eat. It has to digest. So if you eat more than what you eat, you are creating himsa to your body. At the same time, if you do the opposite, if you are under eating, then you are depriving the body of enough nutrition, that you are actually causing himsa to your body. So under eating is a form of self-harm. So if you can eat appropriately, appropriate quantity, appropriate quality of food, especially that which is very healthy, then in a certain way, you are actually starting the practice of ahimsa. And eat in a company that you keep, that you feel relaxed with, that is not conflicting. Don't talk about topics that you are that create arguments or discussions, or in some of you may call it, oh, blah blah blah. Just eat in quietness, because the moment you start to become argumentative, then you are creating conflict in the environment where you are eating. And again, that will basically, you are consuming the conflict. You are consuming the conflict. And if you are a believer, bless the food and eat it, so that you are eating that food as if it is an offering from the divine. As if it is an offering from the divine. This is very, very important. So the first thing that you can start, we can all start, is within our control. It's a personal practice, which is basically diet. We are doing it every day. We are doing this activity every day. And we can start this in a very simple way. The second thing is to avoid negative or toxic thoughts or circumstances, relationships, etc. Manipulative relationships, whether you are manipulating or you are being manipulated. And very often the two go hand in hand. So it's also something that we have to be very careful about, which is that we need to make sure that we are not in an environment where we are constantly negative about ourselves or others, constantly criticizing, constantly judging ourselves, constantly judging other people, or we are manipulating people to kind of say the things that we want them to say, or do the things that we want them to do. This is a form of aggression. This is a form of violence. So stop being manipulative and stop being manipulated, because even if you are a receiver of manipulation, It is a violence to your body, especially if you are aware that you are manipulated and you continue to stay in that circumstance. That means you are allowing, condoning this violence to yourself. And the same with negative topics like environment, where people are gossiping, people are often talking negative things, criticizing everything, complaining about everything, always negative, negative, negative. That's also an environment that you should try and move away from or avoid, because that is somehow going to affect you and will create conflicts in you, create doubts in you, and this can become violent one way or the other. So don't think that violence is only beating somebody or hitting somebody. It's also a practice that we can do. And in this topic, it's also very important to have attitudes like forgiveness, forgiveness to yourself, forgiveness to others. There is no person in this world who will actually uh, have a situation where they never commit a mistake or a blunder even. So you cannot judge them and hold it against that person forever. We have to let go, we have to forgive and move on. And this comes to the third topic also, which is to find a peaceful resolution to conflicts. Conflicts are essential part of our life. If there are two people, there is bound to have a conflict somewhere, because not everybody will agree with us all the time. And even ourselves, we are changing the way we see things, the way we understand things all the time. So what we may have agreed with somebody before, but now for a few years later we have changed, and therefore we see disagreement. So conflicts is very essential part of life. It is bound to happen. But what is important, and this is where Pratipaksha Bhavana comes in, Patanjali talks about, is to have a peaceful resolution of the conflict. You cannot avoid conflict, because if you avoid conflict, the only way is to run away from all people in this world, and still you will not avoid conflict because you will have conflict with yourself. So there is no way that you can run away from conflict. The important thing is to find peaceful resolution to this conflict, and that's through negotiation and compromise. So negotiation and compromise are also a practice of ahimsa. You cannot say the only way to win this conflict is to destroy the other side. That's not actually solving the conflict. It will only create further conflict, because all those you destroy will have family members who will hold grudges, who will hold anger, who will want to do the same back to you. So this is where finding a negotiation and compromise is a practice of ahimsa. And I'm not only talking about countries, I'm talking about even two different people, because every person in this world, we go through our own internal conflicts. So of course we will have external conflicts as well. I mean, if we are having fights within ourselves, how can we have a situation where there is no conflict with others? So that's where Pratipaksha Bhavana comes in. Meditate on the other side, saying, well, maybe they do have some conflicts themselves, maybe their circumstances need to be considered, and that's where the negotiation and compromise comes in. Compromise, finding compromise, is a practice of ahimsa. Finding a compromise is a practice of ahimsa. And this is where it leads me to the next topic of ahimsa, which is the concept of letting go control. The reason why we don't want to have a compromise is usually because we always want to be in control of ourselves and others. We want others to behave like we want them to behave. But others are not machines. You cannot program that person. Think about it, my dear friends. Even we cannot control everything that goes on in our body or mind. How long can you control the urge to go to the bathroom? You cannot. If it comes, you have to go. You cannot say, no, no, I don't want to go. It's not the right time. You have to go. You have to go. How long can you remain without sleeping? How long can you remain without eating? You cannot control everything in your own self. How can you control in some other person's lives? And this is where this idea of letting go, control, is also a way of ahimsa, because if you are trying to control others, in a way you are violating their free will to exist. You are violating their freedom to do things the way they are supposed to do. It's very, very important. At the same time, freedom does not mean that somebody can do whatever they want. There's always the reminder that I say to my students, no decision is perfect, but all decisions have consequences. So people are free to make their decisions as long as they are also accepting of the consequences. You cannot have a decision that is without consequences. So this is where we have to be very, very clear. Controlling is a form of himsa. So letting go control is a form of ahimsa. Don't try to control too much yourself or others. It's very, very important. And another way to practice ahimsa is basically to, it's a very trivial one, but something we can do is to not skip our meals or sleep. If you notice, usually we become very, very irritable when we have not had enough rest and when we are hungry. Usually these are the two major occasions when we are highly irritable. And that is when we have not rested enough, when we have not had enough nourishment, you will see that we are tending to act violently. And that's why a way to practice that is regular sleep, regular resting, regular meals, healthy meals. And then we are not in this situation where we are having a tendency to react rather than respond carefully. We just react. So when we are in this kind of state, we tend to get angry much more easy. So this is another important thing, which is to practice in such a way that we tend to get more and more rest and things like that. Since many of us are in the field of yoga as well, we also should learn to honor limitations or boundaries of our body as well as our mind and limits. For example, since many of us we practice yoga, for example, we should not push ourselves beyond what the body is doing, is able to do, just because We saw the photo of one asana looking wonderful in some book, or maybe our friend is able to do it fantastically, much better than us, and so we are a bit jealous, or we feel that it will improve our self-worth if we can just somehow push ourselves into that position. These are all ways in which we can practice himsa on the mat. The same with techniques like pranayama or mudras. We can push ourselves beyond our capacity and create a problem. Now, the same we can extend it to outside the mat, like not respecting our limitation. For example, to work more than we are able to. Just because we need to pay some bills, we sometimes push ourselves to work much more than we are able to do. There are this whole idea that we all have to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week is an artificial concept, because some people may have the capacity to work 40 hours a week for some period of time in their lives, but not forever, and certainly not everybody. So if we are pushing our body beyond our capacity to work, this is also a way we are harming the body. Whereas if we learn to respect our boundaries and work within our capacity, then that is also a way we practice ahimsa. And in this regard, also to take enough rest. And when I say work, I do not only talk about going to an office. Many women, for example, are mothers, and they think that they should be the perfect mother and do beyond what they can do or what the children can do. They have to take the children to school themselves and then come back themselves, and then take the child in the evening to first a piano class, and then after piano class a German class, and after German class a swimming lesson, and after swimming lesson some chess lessons, and after chess lessons maybe some judo classes. And this way they are violating the not only their children, whose capacity is not really there to do all these activities, but also themselves, and they get burnt out. Imagine if they have 2 or 3 children like that, and they have to take the children everywhere. This is another way of abusing oneself, abusing themselves. I mean, it's not just to blame the employee who is making you work 40, 50, 60 hours a week, because many of these are also self-imposed. Somehow there is an idea that the children have to be taken to like 6 different classes or 7 different classes after school. Who the hell created this idea? Nobody knows. Is it healthy? Absolutely not. Is it crazy? Absolutely yes. So we are creating violence for them, the children, as well as for ourselves, by running around and then getting exhausted and burnt out. And by the time we are in our 30s, we are already exhausted and burnt out. We've got chronic fatigue, burnout syndrome, fibromyalgia, and every chronic immune system disorder that we can have, which is all self-imposed. This is a violence that can be avoided. So this is also respecting boundaries, limitations. I don't know if it's the best word is boundary or a limitation. It's like our capacities, body, our mind, they all have some capacities, and we need to accept that. And you will notice that even this capacity is not fixed. In some seasons, you will have some more energy. In some seasons, you may have less energy. That's fine. Respect it. Respect it. If you look at nature, that's how things work. If you look at plants, they don't flower all the time. There are some seasons when they flower, and some seasons they just rest. it's okay. The same we should do for ourselves. So this is another way we can practice ahimsa. Now, another thing that we can do to practice ahimsa is to have a non-violent relationship with the environment with which we are living in. When you are going into the forest, don't kick the tree or don't break the tree or don't, just because you want the path to be cleared. Respect the forest or nature for what it is. The same with an ocean or a river. Don't throw like garbage in the, like a Coca-Cola can or something. I mean, there is the Himalayas, which is the great, beautiful mountains in north of India, and so many tourists are coming there, and they are throwing so many cans of garbage there. And there is even some people who have made sculptures from the collected garbage in the Himalaya. And this is such a strange thing. It's such a beautiful place, and we are going there to be nourished by that place, but yet we are harming that place. By harming that place, we are in return harming ourselves. So practicing ahimsa towards nature, like, the use or trying to use lesser number of plastic bags, or recycling things, buying used things rather than always trying to buy the newer things and throwing away things. And instead of throwing away things, what you could do is give away things to some people who may not have it, so that at least there is a recycling that is happening, which is very, very important. And right now, this topic is very, very sensitive, because there are some very strong views that some scientists have, that we are either very close to or have crossed the tipping point of no return. So we need to be very, very careful, because the more we harm the environment we live in, the more we are going to harm ourselves. And this is what I would say to practice with our environment, which includes other people, other neighbors, etc. You don't have to throw your garbage in the neighbor's house or things like that, which is quite common in some Asian countries where it's densely populated. They just throw the garbage out of the window and it just goes into the next door neighbor. That's not really good or funny, but it is what it is. And so we can avoid those things, being a bit more mindful of how we deal with these kind of things. And another thing I want to say is, to not practice ahimsa is not to always want to be right. I think this is a very fundamental attitude that some people and some societies have. The idea that, okay, I am right, everybody else is wrong. And this gets indoctrinated in many ways. And it could be at an individual level, where somebody wants to be always right. They want to have the last word. They want to have they want to be right, that no other way is even considered. So it can happen on an individual level. It can happen in a country level, where one country, which nowadays we have some examples we don't need to name, where they believe they are right and everybody else is wrong, even though the whole world thinks they're wrong. They don't care a damn, they think they're right. That's very dangerous. And in another way, there are also, even beyond countries, when you look at certain religious non-tolerant ideas, that only one religious view is right and everything else is wrong, that creates conflict, this need to be right always. So practicing of ahimsa in this kind of context is to say it's okay not to be right. It's okay not to always be right. We can be right sometimes, and sometimes other people can be right. It's okay, because that's what makes life interesting. If you look at this from a strategic point of view, from a sport perspective, because this also is about winning, right? The person who wants to always be right basically wants to win always. If you look at it from a sport point of view, if you think about it, let's say there are two teams that are playing sport, and only one team is always winning and the other team it doesn't win. Nobody will watch that sport anymore. It becomes boring. There's no more sport. So one team cannot always be the winner. Life is about, you know, up and down. There are different views. So to remind ourselves that we don't need to always be right. We can be wrong sometimes, and it's okay to be wrong sometimes, because we have talked about forgiveness already earlier. We can forgive ourselves for making mistakes. This is also a way to practice ahimsa, that we are not always going to be right. And this is obviously the truth, because there is not one person in this entire planet, in the entire history of time, a human who has always been right. Okay, of course, somebody can say, oh, well, God is always right. Well, that's why I qualified it. A human can never be right all the time. Well, will make some mistakes. It's normal. So this is what is the beauty of humanity, that we make errors, that we make mistakes, and that we are sometimes wrong. That's okay. We don't have to win all the time. So this attitude that we have to win all the time, we have to be right all the time, is himsa. The opposite attitude, developing that, okay, it's okay to lose sometimes, it's okay to be wrong sometimes, that can be a practice of ahimsa. And the last one I want to say, and this is personally a very, very favorite of mine, because this is one of the ways I am also trying to practice this topic, is through daily prayer and daily gratitude, or meditation of gratitude. Very often, the reason why we are agitated is usually because of something that we don't have, or something that we want more. When you practice gratitude, you start to realize how many good things you have, how many great things you have. And it's then suddenly you realize, okay, I don't need to be in conflict, I can be in peace. Peace is a way ahimsa expresses itself. Peace is a way ahimsa expresses itself. And the same we can do with prayer. Every day, if we can dedicate some time to prayer, not in a necessarily in a dogmatic way, but more as an attitude of humility toward the divine, that we are not that great, that we need to be humble, reminding ourselves to be humble, reminding ourselves not to boost our ego. This is how we can also practice ahimsa, because when we develop our ego, ego wants to dominate others. Ego wants to dominate others, and that somehow that power takes over and we become violent. That's why there's a great statement that some people say, I think in politics, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's, we have seen in history, all the powers that became more and more powerful, they really abused so many people, and of course they collapsed. They of course collapsed. So this is why we need to remind ourselves of being humble, and that's what we should use as the bhavana, the visualization of the prayer to remind ourselves of humility. And the reason why ahimsa becomes so important is because um, the moment we have violence, it is the devil that's taken over. It's the devil that takes over, and it wants to become us to become more and more violent. And the more and more violent we become, the more and more we deviate from spiritual practices. That's why if you look at all the great spiritual leaders, whether it is Patanjali or the Buddha or Jesus, they all talked about finding love, finding peace. And this is this is really not to become violent, is the very, very important teaching. And it's very fascinating that even Buddhism and yoga, they have the same topic of ahimsa, and they give it a very, very high place in the part of the practitioner of spirituality. It's so essential that we fully embrace ahimsa at the level of the body, at the level of our intentions, and at the level of our words. And this is very, very important. Now, remember what I said first. It is only violent when there is an intent to harm. If something happens by accident, it is not so. Or if there is an intention to help somebody and you are, like, let's say, pulling out a thorn from somebody, of course it's hurting, but you are actually removing the thorn, not putting it in. So it's very, very important to remember in a very what do you call practical way. And this is very important because today we are living in a society where we are brainwashed to lie in the form of niceness. Niceness is not ahimsa. Niceness is himsa. If you lie to be nice, it is himsa. You are hurting the person and you are hurting yourself, because you will be nice to them in front of them and in the back you will talk and gossip about them. That is absolutely inconsistent with the principle of satyam and of ahimsa. And that's why do not get confused with niceness to ahimsa. It's not. Ahimsa is very, very clear. It is actions that are congruent with satyam, which is having the intention of not hurting somebody. And sometimes we may have to tell some hard truth, like if the doctor is going to give a prognosis to the family, deliver bad news. That's not the intention to harm that family that they are giving the bad news. They are giving that bad news because that's the truth. And that cannot be considered himsa, even though the people who may hear it will feel hurt, especially if you are going to hear that your family member is going to die or has a severe case of cancer or some very, very dangerous illness. Of course, you will feel hurt. But the doctor is not telling that with the intention of hurting, with the intention of hurting. Now, of course, when we talk about these yamas, we also have been reminded by Patanjali that there are some very, very, very rare occasions where we can actually have the exceptions to acts of violence. Like, for example, Patanjali talks about Jati, Desha, Kala, Samaya, 4 different circumstances. Jati, like for example, the job. If a soldier has signed up to be a soldier, in the battlefield, he has to fire the bullets. His way of practicing ahimsa would be to not kill civilians or children or unarmed people, or not to kill people outside of the battlefield. So this is what is called jati as an exception. Desha, place, like I said, the soldier can fight in the battlefield, but not off the battlefield. He cannot come home with his gun and start shooting his wife and children, saying, I am a soldier, I'm going to shoot. That's not the right desha for him to be violent. Whereas if he's in front of the enemy, who also has a machine gun in front of him, and they are both equal, they are fighting, that's desha, for appropriate desha to practice violence, because they are both in the battlefield. Kala, time of war you fight, time of non-war don't fight. In time of peace you fight, you don't fight, you practice friendliness, but in times of war you fight. This is called kala. Sometimes we may have to make an exception like that. Similarly, samaya, circumstances. If somebody is coming to like kill you and you are killing them back in self-defense, only that person who is coming to kill you, not everybody else who is part of their family, then that is also considered as an exception of samaya. For example, if a woman is about to get raped by somebody and she is defending herself by punching that man back or breaking his leg, that's okay, so that she can protect herself. That's an exception, that's okay, because that's the samaya. So these are very specific contexts where we can make some exceptions, but we cannot take this and generalize to large population. Sometimes I have to say, I'm sorry to say that some Western media has a lot of bias in this topic. They like to write bad things about country like India, saying, oh, India is land where everybody gets raped. It's not true. There is 1.4 billion people in India, and not everybody coming here is doing that. But somehow there is a collective judgment that is given to Indians, and that is not correct. That is neither satyam nor is it ahimsa. It is both. But of course, there is an agenda behind that. This is what I say. You cannot dish out collective judgments or collective punishments just because something happens. In this case, if we have to do the reverse, I think we will have to have a big list of crimes against the Western countries that have been the biggest colonizers and abusers of humanity in history. So, but we don't do it. We just are much more relaxed because Indian or Asian religions are much more secular and balanced in the approach, and we have integrated these topics historically a little bit more than maybe the younger religions or the younger societies coming from the West. So anyway, there are some exceptions to the ahimsa, but we cannot make the exception the rule. So this, my dear friends, is a simple topic about the concept of ahimsa. I hope this has been useful for you. Please reflect about it, because it's a very, very important uh, principle that we have to practice in our spiritual path. And I'm very happy to share this with you today. And we will slowly conclude with a chant, and we will meet next month, hopefully a bit earlier in the month, where we will explore the topic of Satya. So let's end with a small chant for peace. Om Tachyoravruಣಿमहे गातं यज्ञाय गातं यज्ञपतये दैवे स्वस्तिरस्तु नः स्वस्तिर्मानुषेभ्यः ऊर्ध्वं जिघातु भेषजम् शन्नो अस्तु द्विपदे शं चतुष्पदे ॐ शांत शांत शांति Namaste, friends. Namaste.